Guess who's back? Back again. Sheets is back. Tell a friend. Guess who's back? Guess who's back? Welcome to Radical Personal Finance, everybody. My name is Joshua Sheets. I am your host. I am happy to be back with you today after a little bit of paternity leave. And I have been thinking and working, and all is good. So thank you all so much for your patience with my rather extended absence here, but everyone is doing well. My wife and I welcomed our sixth baby in the recent past, and she is doing fantastic. The baby is doing well. Everything is good, and I am back to work. And this particular baby was great, probably the smoothest of all of them, and that was good. However, this particular baby was the most challenging in many ways because of all of the changes that I have been making in my life. And I'm not going to share with you all of them today, but just let it be known that my life's been mixed up. We've been in the process of changing houses, moving all over the place, doing different things. This baby went to Brazil and did birth tourism in Brazil. And so I've kind of been in makeshift digs for a little while. And one of the themes that I have been thinking a lot about is how stinking hard it is to not have proper infrastructure in life. And on today's podcast, I want to share with you a lesson that, while I don't like it to be true, I have finally come to believe is true. And that is this. If you want to be productive, if you want to make a difference in the world, if you want to do big things, you had better keep the proper infrastructure in your life. And you can't cheap out. Now, I have paid a lot of money, both directly and in terms of lost productivity, to learn this lesson. So let me give it to you cheap, and you try to be a better student than I was. But I'll try to articulate some of the lessons that I have learned in a way that I hope will help you. First, a little bit of background for you about me and my story. I am a perfectly normal human. Well, that's not true. I was a perfectly normal human being when I was a boy. And as a boy, I lived a very stable lifestyle. We didn't move a lot. We didn't travel. We traveled more than some people, but we didn't just bounce around. I didn't know anything of uncertainty. I never wondered if we'd have food tomorrow. We always lived in a perfectly reasonable house. We moved a couple of times when I was a boy, but I think I've lived in 3 houses before I was in college, which is not too much, and they were all in the same town. And I lived a very stable and settled existence. And in fact, one of the things that I have come to appreciate about that existence is how impactful and important it was for me growing up as a boy to live a stable and settled existence. I've lived a blessed and privileged life. I lived in one town for the first more than 30 years of my life, and I knew everybody, everything. Everything was consistent. And my parents are not flighty people. They're not the kind of people that just bounce around and change things on a dime. They're consistent, steady people. My dad's an engineer. They're just consistent and steady. And so I've never been in weird environments of flightiness and bouncing around and doing all kinds of crazy things. And of course, we always want what's on the other side of the fence because the grass is always greener there, which means that if you grow up with a stable existence, then what you often pine for and wish for is instability and other things like that. And so I now look back and I recognize that consistent theme. For me, I always heard stories. Like maybe it started with the Boxcar Children. You read the story about those children who their parents die and they get to go and live in a boxcar. And as a boy, that sounds amazingly fun. No parents, right? Because of course, that's the secret to all good children's literature is first you kill off the parents in some way. But no parents around, no anything. And you could just go and live footloose and fancy free and go and be a hobo. And so when I was younger, I enjoyed some aspect of this, but my adventures were relatively minor. And the reason those adventures were relatively minor was simply because I never could quite line up the money and the geographic freedom. I was always trying to work and build a business and get a job and all that stuff. And so I would travel from time to time, but I never really engaged in some kind of crazy lifestyle. All of that changed in the year 2018. And in the year 2018, which, as you heard here on the podcast, my wife and I went RVing. And I had been interested in RVing for a very long time. And I thought that would be super fun. It would be super interesting. So I pitched my wife on the idea. And after quite a while, she said, oh, okay, let's give it a try. And I thought RVing was going to be just purely amazing. After all, who would want to live in a house when you could live in a car? I mean, it's a fancy car with straight sides and it gets towed behind a truck. But at the end of the day, who would want to live in a house when you can live in a car? It's so much more fun to live in a car. And I think for me, this is really interesting because I've always come to despise the things that are kind of normal and everyday as being boring. Here's an example. I grew up in Florida, the Sunshine State. And so for me, the most boring weather in the world is sunshine. And I never in my life appreciated sunshine. My favorite days were the cold, gray days because they were different and unique and interesting, and you could put on a jacket and you could snuggle up inside and be cozy, and the rest of the time it's just hot and sunny. Well, now, of course, as an adult, having spent more time in places where it's long days of cold grayness and rain and such, I now appreciate bright sunshiny days, and in a way that I didn't. But when I was a child, I didn't appreciate the sunshine because it was always there. In the same way, I never appreciated the stability because it was always there. So when you're surrounded by constant stability, then what's exciting is the instability. So I grew up and my dad bought an old $500 pop-up camper or something like that. And we dragged that sucker all around the United States. And I loved those times. I loved being on the road. I loved going and doing things because it was different. It was unique. It was a change. And so I just thought, man, if I could have more of this in my life, that'd be super fun. So then we went to go RVing. And here's the truth. I loved it. I still like it. I really like RVing. The problem was that even though I really like RVing, I love it, RVing makes a lot of things really difficult. And it's not only difficult for me. One of the things that I learned from that trip that, hey, I'll share my tuition with you. This cost me a good bit, but I thought, man, I'm having an amazing time. This is so fun. And my wife didn't seem like she was having an amazing time. And I thought, that's strange. Why isn't she? I didn't fully understand it at the time, but over time I came to understand that her life was much more difficult in an RV. Because when we were out RVing, we had a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old. And if you have a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old, and you live in a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house with a white picket fence, then you just open the door and say, kids, go play outside. And you know what's outside, and no big deal. They can go and have fun. And it's not that hard. But if you're in an RV parked at the rim of some beautiful canyon, you can't just open up the door and kick the kids out and say, go play outside, because you have no idea what's out there. And so you're kind of always on if you're a mother taking care of children. Well, it wasn't just her, though. So, of course, her life was harder with RVing, but of course, then my life was harder. And for the first time in my life, that's not true. For a new time in my life, I started to understand how difficult life was without better infrastructure. I thought, man, this is going to be easy because all I have to do is just pull up a laptop, pop my microphone down on a table somewhere, hit record, and I'll be able to produce audio gold for my podcast. This is going to be great. And I'm pretty good. I think about what I want to say all the time, and I live in a constant war of voices in my head of different arguments and things. So I thought it'd be no big deal. And it wasn't that big of a deal at first. There were times we'd pull up outside of a rest stop, and I would go and sit on the picnic table. I'd record a great podcast. And I'd do a little bit of work, and I had all the logistics figured out with a cell phone. And anyway, I had it figured out, except for the times where it was a big deal and it didn't work. And those times were a lot. There were a lot of times when, man, if we could just get the kids to sleep, then I can go record a podcast. And I didn't. And I couldn't get it done. And I couldn't get it done. And I couldn't get it done. And then after enough days of not getting it done, I just start to feel this like giant over my head. Like, I've got to get this done. And the straw that broke my back was one day we were in Thermopolis, Wyoming. Thermopolis, I'm not sure. Thermopolis, Wyoming, where the hot springs is in Wyoming. And we'd driven all day, and it had been days since I had recorded a podcast, maybe weeks, I don't know, but I had to get it done. And so we were all lined up, and we'd spent the entire day planning to get this podcast done. And So I said, okay, we got to get to a campsite. That's good. And so we're going to Thermopolis, Wyoming. So we go to the campsite and we drive hard. Boom. We get there and we got to line it up. So we get there right before lunchtime so we can check into the campsite. We set up the camper, have a quick bite of lunch, put the kids to bed. And then I've got my 2 hours where I can go and record a podcast. So the plan works as expected. We go, we park the camper, we make lunch, we put the children in bed. Okay. And I grab my bag and I hurry across the campground, beautiful campground, of course. Hurry across the campground, grab an empty picnic table in the middle of nowhere where it's going to be nice and quiet, and I'll be able to work. And I set up my computer, and I set up my recording device, and I set up my microphones, and I've got everything set up. And the sprinklers come on in the middle of the day in this empty campground. And I'm sitting there with thousands of dollars worth of gear getting drenched by a sprinkler. So I scooped it all up and I sprinted away and I just admitted defeat. And I was like, I can't. I don't even know what to do. So we went to the hot springs in Thermopolis, Wyoming, and we had a nice time. And I didn't get a show created that day, but I said, I have to find a new solution. So what's the new solution? Well, the new solution is, of course, infrastructure, better infrastructure. So I wound up buying another camper. And for the rest of that trip, I had 2 campers. I bought it in Idaho, and I had a truck camper on the back of my pickup truck, and that was my office. And I had a house camper, which was the travel trailer that we were pooling. And so that was where I worked, and it worked okay, right? I did use it. I would go and say goodbye to my wife and leave her in the travel trailer with the children, and I would go hop in the truck camper and drive it to some place where I could either get internet or do something, and it worked, right? I recorded courses, I recorded podcasts, and it was better. So every time the infrastructure got better, then my life got better. But then, of course, something's going to change. So I won't go through all the play-by-play, but this has been the constant story of my life. As I get excited about some idea, about some cool and neat way to live, like living in a camper or, saving a bunch of money or having a mobile office, and I just am convinced, man, this is going to be great. And all those dumb old fogies that think you have to have an office that's in the same place and go to work from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., they're just all wrong. They don't understand how I can just sit down and pop my laptop open and be productive in the middle of nowhere. And now I'm an old fogey, and I'm here to say that they are correct. and this lesson has cost me so much. You have no idea how much money I have wasted and not made due to having impossibly inadequate infrastructure. And maybe you're smarter than me. Maybe you would have learned less, but at least if I do finally learn, I try to share it with the world and humble myself in public and say, hey, I've learned my lesson. And the lesson is this: if you want to do something significant, you have to have good infrastructure. And you can't let your frugality be the thing that costs you infrastructure. This is something that I have had to learn across every level, from the simplest, most mundane of things, of a cell phone and a computer, to the biggest things of a house and where you live and all of those things. You have to have good infrastructure. And if you can't afford good infrastructure and you want to do big things, then you better go back and fix it and make sure you can afford good infrastructure. See, I don't know how. I have not yet been able to create a model that effectively talks about how much to spend and invest on money into things that make you money. But just little things like cell phones and computers. I've prided myself in years past. This is past tense, full past tense, not present progressive past tense. I prided myself in years past on all of my frugal solutions, of my cool ways to get by with the minimum solution. And the cheapest phone and the most frugal phone plan and the cheapest computer. And I was really good at a lot of that stuff. And I did a lot with a lot of that stuff. But man, the problem is that when it doesn't work for a moment and the costs are huge. When you're trying to fix your phone and, of course, you buy some dumb iPhone that doesn't have expandable storage, as I do, of course, and you bought the cheap one to save $200 on memory, and then you can't upgrade the phone because there's not enough memory, and you're just stuck right in an important moment. That's just unacceptable. Same thing with computers, same thing with phones. Every single time I upgrade a piece of gear, I ask myself, why was I so dumb as to not do that 2 years ago? Why didn't I do that 2 years ago? And of course, there's a point at which that's not true. I just don't know where that point is, because it seems like every single time I wait just a little bit too long. And then the big ones for me have often been housing. And again, back to how I grew up, right? I didn't grow up with the thing of living in a car, but I like living in a car. And then what happens is, because I saw living in a car as like, hey, this is a cool pathway to getting everything I want now, and I found people who glorified living in a car, as in hyperfrugality and whatnot, then I thought, okay, this is great. And it might be great for them. And frankly, if I were a single dude, I would probably be living in a car and it would work. I've said that, and I'm not kidding. Like, I enjoy that weird lifestyle. I would live in a truck camper, and I would park it under a pine tree, and I would work on my laptop, and I'd have my Starlink dish on the top of my truck camper, and it would probably work for me. But I'm not a single dude. And what works for the single dudes doesn't work for me. And for me, if I don't have a big house, and if I don't have people who are helping me and whatnot, then I don't get work done, because I have to do it all. And then if I don't get work done, then nothing good happens. And it's all a problem of infrastructure. So if you want to do big things, right? If you just don't want to be some random dude living in a truck camper out underneath a pine tree, you're going to have to build and maintain infrastructure. You're going to need a proper office to work in. And you're not going to get a deal by working at an internet cafe. You need a proper office. The internet cafe seems like the great idea, or internet cafes don't exist anymore. Sorry, here I am living in the world of 2006. Coffee shops seem like a good deal, because we think, oh, I can just go and pop it open. But at every instant, it falls apart. And so you need to have a good, solid office that you go to with no distractions. This happens to me all the time with recording audio and doing things. It's a very simple thing. I need to sit down. I need to record a podcast for 30 minutes or an hour or whatever it's going to be. Who we kidding? And then I go to the point, and finally I have it scheduled into the day when the baby is asleep and everyone's and everyone's got their schoolwork done, and I've got calls done and clients are taken care of, and here's my window, and I sit down, and the dude's outside blowing the leaves with the leaf blower. Never fails. And that's the point of proper office space. Why do businesses go and rent or buy proper Class A office space where everything is controlled? Because time is money. And when you show up to work, you need to walk in and everything needs to work. So office space, proper, full, adequate office space counts. You can find, obviously, some cool ways to do it, but don't cheap out on it. I'm done with that. Done that so much in my life. Now, incidentally, on this, I'll make one counter argument. Sometimes there are some alternative solutions that I think are really effective. So, for example, I have enjoyed having a mobile office space. Years ago, I read an author, and one of his things that he liked to do was he had a small enclosed cargo trailer. And what he would do is he would take a small enclosed cargo trailer and he would put in it like a lazy boy recliner, like a nice soft recliner and a little table. And he would just drive his little cargo trailer out, park it next to some stream, and he would sit in the back and work. So that's something that actually worked well for me. I like that. I've been very productive many times when I'm off the grid. And this is easier to do now than it's ever been. When I first started doing this 10 years ago, I had my deep cycle marine battery that I would haul out of the back of my pickup truck, and I would set up my table and my chair. I'd pull them out. I'd set up my deep cycle battery, and I'd clamp on my inverter, and then I would run my extension cord over to my computer. And at the time, I would record podcasts and courses, and I had this big soundboard, and I'd drag this big soundboard out and set it up. All the gear. It took me 15 minutes to set up my gear. Today, just a laptop and I use a couple other pieces of gear that all have just simple, smooth batteries, and you can get great battery products. So it's super simple to do this. And I love this because it actually inspires me if I can be in some kind of beautiful place. And that's something that you can do. If you need to really focus on work and you want to be off the grid, well, drive your car down by the river. But you probably should have that trailer on behind so that if it's raining or whatever, then you're comfortable. And so I'm not saying there's not a place for mobile solutions or kind of fun solutions, but you've got to have the full solution that you need. And so things like office space is really important, because on the days when you want to make phone calls, you want to be on the rock solid signal with multiple things, not driving around frantically figuring out where you can do it. It happened to me recently. I had some guy that asked for an interview from me. Okay, I did the interview and something went wrong in my life. And instead of being in my office at the time, I'm rushing around madly. Where can I get proper cell phone coverage? Which leads me to communications technology. In our modern world, communications technology is really key. A lot of us, if we can communicate, we can do well. And that is the infrastructure that matters. It may not be the key, the most important thing for you to be in a mahogany paneled office with a mahogany desk, but what you really need is infrastructure that makes your life work, that's communications. And I've learned the hard way, the little things, right? No MVNOs, at least not if you're making money on them. No cheap devices. You need the latest, greatest thing that's going to have all the technology to make it work. And you need to kind of have the stuff that makes it work. So, for example, I've very sadly over the years had to walk away from a lot of the really cool techie solutions, the stuff that just works. I made fun of the iPhone a moment ago. It's not that the iPhone is great. But the reason I switched to Apple years ago was because I got so tired of trying to cobble together some solution to a tech problem using Windows when all of the people that did what I do all use Macs. And so all the software that I always needed was always available first on Apple. And all I had to do was go and buy a Mac and boom, it was done. And then they've just continued over the years that same basic theory of integration. And if you just line up all the devices and you plop down your $8,000 for your MacBook and your iPad and your iPhone and your Apple Watch and your whatever else the 15 things are they're going to come out with, you just plop down all your money and then boom, 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 boom. It just works all the way across it. And life is simple and you can be productive. And I lost, unfortunately, I always had this interest in privacy. I lost years to privacy and huge amounts of things, of money to kind of the private solutions. And so build your tech stack, your communications, have proper cell phone plans, have your Starlink dish that goes with you. And I never liked to do that. Because I thought, man, if I could just save this $200 a month, and if I could take that $200 a month, and look how much money I could do, because I use the personal finance formulas, and how much money do I need in my investment account to pay this $200 a month? And isn't it cheaper to pay the $200 a month? Yes, but you need the stuff to work. So every time I take a step in that direction and have the stuff work, it's good. So work stuff, right? Office, infrastructure for communications, and then the infrastructure for your business, whatever that is. Whatever it is that makes your business work, make it go. If you need a big monitor, get a big monitor. If the big monitor wastes time, skip it and work on your phone. But whatever you need that makes it work is really, really key. And we're living in a world where the solutions are there. Again, you can have 2 cell phone networks or more on your phone just ready to go all the time. I do this. I find it very useful. You can have multiple backups, and that really pays off. Then you switch the business infrastructure and then family infrastructure. And I think that's the other thing that I've learned over the years. I was late to the game, right? Life was pretty easy when I was when things were just us. And what I realized eventually was, wait a second, there's a difference between me and the lifestyle that I live and many other influencers and the lifestyle that they live. And I realized I've spent so much time consuming content from influencers and I didn't realize the disconnect. Now, this stuff for me goes way back. I could drop names to, I don't even remember the guy's name, things like living with 100 things challenges and whatnot. It was 2000 and 2005, so 20 years ago, in the world of blogs, I would read all of these bloggers that were always, of course, single young dudes. And look, I only own 90 things or 100 things or 50 things. And I travel the world and I move every 3 months. I forget some of the ones I was into. Everett Boggy was one. I was subscribed to him before he disappeared. And so this was like, these were my people at that phase of life. And I thought, this is the way to go, right? Travel super light, don't have anything. And then what happened is I started having children, and of course I naturally upgraded some things, but I never got rid of that mentality until too late. And I didn't realize for those years in between what was happening is that I had the wrong mentality. And there was no older, wiser mentor with 4 children who came along and said, "Hey, Joshua, I can understand why you're attracted to that kind of lifestyle, but here's the flip side. Here's why you actually want to have good infrastructure in your life." I learned it the hard way. Twice over the last 5 years, I've been homeless with various children. Now, I've not been broke homeless living on the street, but I've been without a home, without a place. And it's unbelievably stressful to be in that situation with children. If you're a single person or a couple with no children, I don't think it's so stressful because you can pretty well bounce around pretty easily. You can bounce from Airbnb to Airbnb and from house to house and hotel to hotel, and you can make the money work if you have the money. But with children, everything is difficult because everything is hard when they're not in their native environment. And you go to a hotel room and you spend all your time, instead of actually doing productive work, you spend all your time trying to keep your children quiet for the benefit of the other people. You spend all your time in an Airbnb trying to keep them from destroying the place because they're just in a new environment and they're going to explore things. And our world is not set up for that. So that's the lesson I want to share with you, is that now that I'm old and wise, I have decided that I now see the value of infrastructure, of good and proper infrastructure, of big houses and new cars and fancy stuff. And my old frugal ways, they no longer serve me at this stage in my life. And I am drawing the line in the sand that I'm not going to go back to that line of thinking, because if I do, I will not be able to achieve my potential. And that is quite a fearful thought. It's not that the concept of frugality, for example, is not an appropriate one. Everyone should be frugal, but the scale of frugality that you apply at different times in life should be different. If you're 20 years old and you're a firefighter, then yeah, you should go and live in your pickup truck for a few years so that you can stack up a couple $100,000 from not having any housing payments, or live on a couch. Why? Well, because there's no connection to your productivity, your financial productivity, and whether or not you're sleeping on a couch if you're 20. But if you're 40, that plan doesn't work, at least if you're not a recently divorced single guy, right? Maybe it does in that situation, kind of setting things up. But we have this like flexibility of who is this right for at what time. I've gotten better at it over the years. I've gotten pretty good at it over the years, but I've gotten pretty good at it because I had to learn all these lessons the hard way. And I had to learn over time to say, hey, you know what? That is cool advice for somebody else. Or that is a brilliant idea for a different phase of my life. And this is not the time. This is not the phase. I'm not the person who can apply that particular piece of advice and have it make sense. The advice is not wrong. It's just wrong for me now. So frugality looks like one thing at 20, looks like another thing at 40, looks like another thing at 60. Frugality looks like one thing at $20,000 a year of income. It looks like another thing at $400,000 a year of income, and it looks like another thing at $6 million a year of income. The frugality is necessary, but the definition changes dramatically. And if we don't upgrade our definitions over time and try to figure out where we are in the life scale of, am I short on money or am I short on time? What can I do with an hour? What can I do with a good, proper mental state? What can I do if I could actually go to the office and sit down and work? Man, wouldn't that be nice? Hope that's helpful to you. It's a lesson that cost me a lot. Maybe you're like me and you have to learn all your lessons the hard way. But feel free, take this, steal it, use it. May it benefit you enormously.